It's the question that still haunts the timeline of every Directioner from 2015. What exactly happened between Louis Tomlinson and Zayn Malik? And more importantly, why has that silence stretched on for nearly a decade while other friendships within the band have been painstakingly rebuilt? Look, I've been covering pop culture dynamics for years now, and I have to tell you, this specific Cold War is different. It's not just a disagreement over a chorus melody or a missed birthday party. It's a quiet, persistent disconnect that feels far heavier than the sum of its parts. And today, we're pulling on the only thread that really matters in this story. It isn't just about March 25th, 2015, when Zayn walked away from the hotel room in the band. It's about what happened after. It's about a moment of trust that, according to multiple reports and long-standing industry chatter, was perceived as a break so clean that the edges never healed. I want to walk you through this carefully because, frankly, this is one of the most misunderstood narratives in modern music. People think it's just ego. I think it's grief. And if you stay with me until the end, I'm going to show you the one specific line from Louis, just one sentence that didn't make the front pages of Billboard, but completely reframes everything you think you know about this split. Because while Harry and Louis have been able to navigate the water under the bridge and even share a laugh at a premiere, and while Liam and Niall have always been the neutral Switzerland of the group, the door between Louis and Zayn seems to have been not just shut, but welded closed, and then covered in a thick layer of Doncaster steel. Why? Let's rewind to the moment the crack became a canyon, because the first major curiosity gap here isn't the exit itself, it's the delivery. Zayn left One Direction via Facebook statement, and if you remember the timeline correctly, and I know you do because this is burned into our collective teenage memory, the immediate reaction was chaos, but the second wave of reaction, the one that came about 48 hours later, was from Louis, and it wasn't just a generic "we'll miss him." He took to social media with a level of fire and sarcasm that we rarely see from him unless he's defending his family or his football club. There was a specific interaction with a producer, Naughty Boy, that spiraled into a very public, very messy digital back and forth. Now, here's where I want to give you a little piece of analysis that might make you go, "Oh right, that makes sense." We've always framed that moment as Louis being protective of the band's brand. But if you followed Louis Tomlinson's career since 2016, you'll notice a pattern. He doesn't get mad about business, he gets mad about loyalty. That's the psychological trigger we need to hold on to here. Louis operates on a code of brotherhood that is so intense, it's almost a character trait from a gritty northern drama. And when Zayn left, according to sources close to the situation, it wasn't just that he left, it was that the exit was perceived as happening outside the family conversation. Louis later admitted in various interviews that the initial reaction was spiteful and from a place of anger, and honestly, that's the most human thing I've ever heard him say about it. He was hurt, so he lashed out. Fair enough. But if the argument was just about a Facebook post in 2015, it would have blown over by the time the Pillow Talk video dropped. We're adults now. Most of us have buried hatchets over far dumber things we did in our early 20s, especially when millions of dollars and a shared legacy are involved. So why hasn't it? This brings us to the second, and I think far more significant open loop in this saga. It's the one that involves a face that is not Zayn's and not Louis's, but someone who stood in the middle of it all. The late Johanna Deacon, Louis's mom. Now, I know we're venturing into deeply personal territory, and I'm going to be very cautious with my language here because this is about a real family's pain. But to understand the impenetrable wall between these two men, we have to look at 2016. Louis's mother was battling a very aggressive form of leukemia. It was an incredibly dark private time for the Tomlinson family, and they were navigating it while Louis was also trying to launch a solo career and process the band's hiatus. And this is where the story takes a turn that even the most seasoned tabloid writer couldn't have predicted. According to reporting from The Sun and other UK outlets at the time, and more importantly, alluded to by Louis himself in later documentary footage, there was a moment of expectation. When you go through something that catastrophic, losing a parent in the public eye, you find out very quickly who's in your corner and who's on the periphery. And the question that lingered over the fandom for years was simple: did Zayn reach out? Reports and insinuations have long suggested that the line of communication was at best radio silence. Now, I want to be crystal clear here. We do not know the private text messages exchanged. We do not have access to Zayn Malik's phone records, nor should we. It is entirely possible, and I say this as a human being with my own sarcastic opinions, that Zayn simply didn't know what to say. Grief is awkward. It makes people run away. I've seen it happen in my own life. But the narrative that cemented itself in the Tomlinson camp, whether fair or unfair, was that the support was absent. And for Louis, who had already felt that initial sting of abandonment when Zayn left the band, this second silence in the face of the worst pain imaginable, that's not a wound you just slap a bandage on. That's a compound fracture of the friendship. Fast forward to 2019, Louis goes on the show called Dan Wooten Interview. Dan asks him point blank, and I remember watching this live and feeling my jaw drop a little bit. "Have you heard from Zayn since you lost your mom?" And Louis, with this look that I can only describe as exhausted resignation, says no. Just like that, one syllable, but the weight behind it could sink a ship. He then goes on to say something that is the crux of this entire video. He says he doesn't hold a grudge. He says he wishes him well, but then he drops the line that changes the game. He says it's a shame. It's a shame he didn't feel like he could reach out. Let that sink in for a second. He didn't say, "I'm angry he didn't reach out." He said it's a shame he didn't feel like he could. That's not the language of a bitter pop star. That's the language of someone who's done a lot of therapy and come out the other side with a very clear, very sad understanding that the connection is simply not there anymore. It's not hate, it's a void. And here's where I want to inject my own little bit of sarcastic realism into this news narrative. As an observer, it's fascinating and a little bit infuriating to watch two grown men who shared tour buses, who harmonized on stages that most artists only dream of, be separated by what essentially amounts to an unopened message vibe. We've seen Louis mend fences with Harry. They sat apart at the Brits, but there was that nod. There was that energy of "we were kids, we're okay now." But with Zayn, the body language, even when referencing him, is different. It's stiffer. It's more guarded. Why? Because the Zayn issue isn't about the band's music. It's about a perceived lack of humanity during a crisis. Now, what about Zayn's side of the street? Because we can't just sit here and monologue about one perspective without acknowledging the other. Zayn has been, for lack of a better term, a ghost when it comes to One Direction discourse. He's been vocal about his anxiety, his discomfort with the machine of the band, and his desire to just make his R&B records in peace. In a rare 2022 interview on the Call Her Daddy podcast, he opened up about his own struggles with fame and his somewhat introverted private nature. He's not out here doing press junkets every Tuesday. And this is where my analysis gets a little more nuanced. I don't think this is a case of Zayn being a mustache-twirling villain. I think it's a case of two fundamentally different operating systems trying to connect with a dial-up modem. Louis' the guy who shows up. He's the guy who organizes the charity football match. He's the guy who, even when he's exhausted, will stand in the rain to sign an autograph because he remembers the face. Zayn is the guy who needs to retreat to Pennsylvania and paint and be left alone. Neither of these things is a crime, but when a crisis hits, Louis' love language is presence, and the perceived absence from Zayn, even if it was just Zayn freezing up and not knowing how to handle the heavy stuff, was interpreted as indifference. And that, my friends, is the great tragedy of this pop culture stalemate. It's not a feud over money or women or songs, it's a feud over emotional availability. So where does that leave us now? We're in 2026. Louis just wrapped a massive tour where he sang those old songs and felt the roar of the crowd. Zayn is selling out venues for his solo work, finally stepping out onto the stage after his own battles with nerves. They exist in the same industry, yet they orbit different planets. Is there a world where this gets resolved? I think about the Glastonbury rumor mill that pops up every year. I think about the inevitable 28th anniversary of Up All Night reunion speculation that will hit us like a freight train in about 2030, and I genuinely wonder if this is the one relationship that stays in the professional courtesy zone forever. And you know what? Maybe that's okay. Maybe part of growing up with this band is accepting that not everyone is meant to be in your life forever, even if you shared a moment that defined the lives of millions of other people. It's like that one friend from high school you have zero beef with, but you also have zero desire to get coffee with. It's just done. But I want to leave you with one final twist of the knife, one more psychological trigger that makes this story so hard to look away from.
It's the fact that Louis, in more recent years, has softened his stance so dramatically that it almost makes the silence louder. In a documentary about his life, he looked straight down the barrel of the lens and said he was proud of Zayn. He said he understood the pressures of being the mysterious one, and that he could see how hard Zayn worked on his voice. He basically gave Zayn his flowers in a public garden while Zayn wasn't even there to smell them. That's not the action of a man holding a grudge. That's the action of a man who has done a lot of therapy and come out the other side with a very clear, very sad understanding that the connection is simply not there anymore. It's not hate, it's a void. And that, in a nutshell, is the difference between a reunion and a memory. So as we wait for the next chapter, whether it's a subtle Instagram like or a backstage run-in at a festival, just remember what's really at the center of this iceberg. It's not about the music, it's about the silence between the notes. Let me